The life and death of Saint Grand Duchess Elizabeth of Russia, her brutal murder by the Communists. In Memoriam, Grand Duchess Elizabeth of Russia. When we consider the horrors that disfigured the 20th century, from the Holocaust against the Jews to the mass murders committed by Mao Zedong, not to forget the dropping of the first atomic bomb, the death of one small woman seems to be like small change. Yet, knowledge of the life of Grand Duchess Elizabeth Feodorovna of Russia, and revulsion at the appalling and gruesome way she met her death, can only fill us with antipathy for those who brought it about. It is fair to say that high on the list of charges that brought Vladimir Ulyanov, Lenin, to his residency in hell must have been his treatment of this saintly lady. Grand Duchess Elizabeth was the wife of Grand Duke Sergei Alexandrovich. She was born a Princess of Hesse and a member of the Lutheran Church. She converted to Russian Orthodoxy when she married her husband. She was greatly beloved among the aristocracy and the common people of the Russian Empire, both for her great beauty and her good works among the poor. She was very much in love with her husband. In February 1905, Grand Duke Sergei was assassinated in Moscow by the socialist revolutionary Ivan Kaleyev. Despite being stricken with grief for the loss of her beloved spouse, Elizabeth forgave his murderer. She had inscribed the words of Jesus on his tombstone, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." She even visited Kaleyev in prison to forgive him in person. She then campaigned for his pardon. That campaign failed and he was sentenced to death and hanged for his crime. After the death of her husband, she retreated from the court, and in 1909 she sold off all of her possessions, right down to a wedding ring, and opened a convent in Moscow, where she devoted herself to prayer and to charitable works among the impoverished inhabitants of that city. Her convent included an orphanage, a pharmacy, and a hospital. She worked tirelessly to help alleviate the sufferings of the people, and she didn't hesitate to enter the greatest slums when she thought she could do some good. Meanwhile, away from Moscow, the situation in the Russian Empire deteriorated badly. The First World War brought great misery to the country. The government of the Tsar, Nicholas II, was totally unable to cope. In February 1917, the First Russian Revolution brought the overthrow of the Tsar, and in October of the same year, the unfortunate country fell prey to that bunch of criminals called the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Ulyanov, Lenin. Throughout all this upheaval, Elizabeth continued her work in Moscow. But in 1918, her arrest was ordered by Lenin. She was first taken to Perm and later to Yekaterinburg, where she was joined by other members of the royal family. Later, they were moved to imprisonment in Alapayevsk. The murder of Grand Duchess Elizabeth by the Communists. On 17th July, some members of the secret police, accompanied by some Bolshevik workers, arrived at the prison. Whatever money they had left was taken from the prisoners, and they were told that they were being transferred to another location. They were accompanied only by members of the Cheka, that's to say the secret police. About 20 kilometers outside Alapayevsk, the carts that carried the prisoners stopped near the pit of an abandoned mine shaft. The Cheka beat all the prisoners before throwing the victims into this pit, Elizabeth being the first. Hand grenades were then hurled down the shaft, but only one victim, Fyodor Rimez, died as a result of the grenades. According to the personal account of Vasily Ryabov, one of the killers, Elizabeth and the others survived the initial fall into the mine, prompting Ryabov to toss a grenade in after them. Following the explosion, he claimed to hear Elizabeth and the others singing a Russian hymn from the bottom of the shaft. Unnerved, Ryabov threw down a second grenade, but the singing continued. Finally, a large quantity of brushwood was shoved into the opening and set alight, upon which Ryabov posted a guard over the site and left the scene. In October 1918, the remains of the Grand Duchess and her companions were found. It was determined that Elizabeth had died from wounds sustained when she fell into the mine shaft, but she had been able to bandage the head of one of her companions before her death. Her remains were removed and ultimately buried in the Church of Maria Magdalena in Jerusalem. Grand Duchess Elizabeth was canonized a saint by the Russian Orthodox Church in 1992. Some people may consider that the words of condemnation that are used at the beginning of this broadcast against Ulyanov, Lenin, were a bit harsh. Perhaps as a Christian, I should emulate the late Grand Duchess and forgive him his crime. Technically, of course I do. Nothing would please me any better than to discover that he was granted the grace of repentance before he died. If I am fortunate enough to meet him in heaven, I will gladly shake his hand. But nothing can take away from the fact that in life he was a murderous scumbag, and he inaugurated a form of government that brought misery and death to untold millions. But whatever the judgment of God may be on him, one crime that will forever stain his putrescent memory is that he brought death to a princess whose sole offence was to help those who are less fortunate than herself, and whose life should be forever held up as an example of heroic virtue, something that can never be said about his.